Ben Whitaker wasn't looking for trouble when he bought the land. In fact, he was looking for the opposite. After 28 years as a city firefighter, he'd had enough of sirens, concrete, and smoke-stained skies. What he wanted was silence, dirt roads, stars, maybe a place to keep a few animals, chickens, a couple of goats, and if he got lucky, an alpaca or two. Retirement meant finally building the life he never had time for. The plot he found was imperfect, which made it perfect. 5 acres of overgrown brush just outside the polished gates of Rosewood Hills, a housing development that prided itself on being the finest blend of luxury and unity. Ben didn't care about luxury. He cared that his land sat beyond the HOA boundary, technically part of Rosewood Township, but not part of its governing homeowners association. He made sure of that before signing the deed. The last thing he wanted was someone in a golf cart telling him what color he could paint his mailbox. The neighbors weren't exactly thrilled when Ben started clearing brush and installing a deep red barn, where most of them had trimmed hedges and backyard fire pits. Ben installed fencing, chicken wire, a rain barrel system, and a solar water heater. He drove an old F-250 that coughed dust every time it passed the manicured lawns. Still, he kept to himself, waved when waved at, shared fresh eggs when asked, even invited a few kids over to see the goats, Daisy and Tango. Then the black SUVs started showing up. At first he thought they were realtors, but they never left flyers. They drove slow, windows up, eyes scanning his fence line like they were casing a bank. One even stopped just past his driveway and took pictures. Ben walked out and waved. The car rolled away without acknowledging him. Odd. The next morning, his mailbox had a new sticker on it. Property under review. Rosewood Hills Architectural Compliance Board. Ben frowned. There was no reason for that sticker to be there. His property wasn't under any HOA, and he had the county zoning map to prove it. Still, just to be polite, he drove down to the Rosewood Hills clubhouse. The place looked like a luxury spa. Glass, walls, artificial waterfall. Receptionist with a headset. He asked to speak with someone about the sticker. 10 minutes later, a woman in heels that probably cost more than Ben's boots appeared with a clipboard and a Botox-tied smile. Mr. Whitaker, hello, I'm Linda Carrington, HOA president. Ben shook her hand firmly. I think you're mistaken. I'm not under your HOA. Linda smiled wider, like a cat with feathers on its breath. Actually, Mr. Whitaker, there's been a recent update to our community charter. Your property falls under the extended community perimeter. Ben blinked. You can't just add, my land. It's for community consistency. Aesthetic cohesion benefits us all. And by remaining adjacent to Rosewood Hills, you technically share visual impact. Ben laughed. Out loud. So now my barn's offensive to your landscape? Her smile never faltered. We'll be sending a formal notice. You'll have 14 days to remove all livestock. Thank you for being a good neighbor. Ben stared at her for a moment. Not angry. Just curious how someone could weaponize a smile like that night, as rain tapped against his roof. Ben looked out across his field. Daisy was curled near the barn. Tango chewed calmly beside her. In the distance, porch lights from the HOA houses glowed like eyes. He felt something cold crawl up his spine. Not fear, not yet, but the kind of knowing that came from years in. Fire? The kind that whispered, this isn't over. By the following morning, the sticker was gone from Ben's mailbox, but it had been replaced by something worse. A formal envelope lay folded inside, stamped with the HOA seal and tucked neatly beside his electric bill. Notice of violation, unapproved livestock structures, unpermitted animals, non-compliant driveway surface. Fines will accumulate at $100 per day. Ben read it twice, then once more. It was addressed not to Ben Whitaker, but to resident lot 143. That was the first red flag. He didn't live in lot 143. His property had a street address, not a development code. He poured a cup of coffee, sat on the porch, and stared at the letter like it might grow legs and walk off. Daisy the goat wandered up and nuzzled his boot, unfazed. She'd seen storms before. So had Ben. He went back to the zoning office that afternoon. A young man behind the counter, whose badge read Tanner, pulled up the digital maps. "See?" Ben said, pointing. "My land's outside the boundary. I checked it 3 times before buying." Tanner leaned closer. "That's weird. Looks like the HOA submitted a redraw request 3 months ago. See here? They marked your lot as part of an annexed buffer zone, but it was never approved by the county." Ben leaned in. "So legally, they've got no teeth?" Tanner shrugged. "Technically, no. But if they're pretending they do, they're banking on you not pushing back." Ben pushed back the next day. He returned to the HOA office. Not the front entrance this time, but to the rear meeting hall, where board gatherings were held every Thursday evening. He brought a guest, Tango the goat, wearing a little yellow vest that read, "Emotional support ruminant." The moment he walked in, conversation stopped. The room smelled of citrus oil diffusers and tension. Linda Carrington, perched at the head of a long table, arched a perfect eyebrow. "Mr. Whitaker, you've brought livestock." Ben patted Tango. He's family. Thought he deserved to hear this in person. A few residents chuckled nervously. Others glared. Linda folded her hands. "You are in violation of multiple HOA standards. You'll need to comply or face escalating penalties." "I don't recognize your authority on my land," Ben said evenly. "And neither does the county." Linda's smile tightened. "Non-compliance can affect more than fines. Utility partnerships, parcel deliveries, access routes. We're trying to preserve the community." Ben stepped forward. "Preserve it from what?" "A couple goats, chickens that lay free-range eggs, a man who minds his business. You're lowering property values," someone muttered near the back. Ben turned. "You mean you feel smaller, standing next to someone who doesn't care about granite countertops?" Linda stood, dismissing him with a wave. "If you choose to be difficult, Mr. Whitaker, we have other ways of enforcing order." That night, things started happening. First, the mail didn't come. For the first time in years, the carrier skipped Ben's box entirely. The next morning, a trash bin he'd set out for pickup was overturned and smashed. No one saw a thing. Then he noticed the fence. A clean, precise cut had been made along the north post line, just enough to let the goats wander. Daisy had wandered into a neighbor's lawn. The woman screamed and threatened to call animal control. Ben fixed the fence, reinforced it, then he installed trail cams. Whatever the HOA was trying, they were just getting started. But so was Ben. He printed out copies of his zoning exemption and pinned them to every fence post. Then he mounted a new sign on the gate. "Private property. You are not entitled to my piece." The war had begun. The cameras caught them on the third night. 2 figures, one in cargo shorts, the other with a flashlight taped to a broomstick, slinking along the fence line like cartoon burglars. The grainy footage didn't reveal faces, but it showed intent. They sliced the chicken wire, pushed open the gate, and scattered feed across the drive to lure the goats out. Daisy wandered to the edge of the road and stood there, blinking into the dark. Tango stayed behind, unimpressed by drama. Ben watched the footage the next morning, jaw tight. He didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. He knew better than to escalate with nothing but fuzzy silhouettes. Instead, he refortified the perimeter with the steel cables, welded hinges, and motion-triggered lights. He posted copies of the footage to the neighborhood Facebook group with a caption that simply read, "If you trespass, you will be filmed." No comments, but the post was shared 17 times. Later that week, things got bolder. A tow truck rolled onto his gravel drive around noon. Ben was in the barn fixing a feed line when he heard the engine. When he stepped outside, the driver was backing toward his livestock trailer, hook arm already swinging. "Can I help you?" Ben called, hand on his hip. The driver jumped like he'd been caught stealing cookies. Sorry sir. Got a call about an abandoned trailer. Address said 27 Ash Bluff." Ben stepped closer. "This is 27A. Private land. That trailer's in here. Mine. You touch it. I report vehicle theft." The man stammered. "I was told this belonged to the HOA." Ben grinned without humor. "Then maybe let them know they're trespassing." The truck peeled out without hooking anything. Ben stood in the dust, watching it shrink into the horizon, heart pounding not from fear, but from fury. This wasn't about chickens or fences anymore. It was personal. That night, a new letter arrived. Typed in all caps, it read, "Continued. Violation will result in forced removal. Community preservation requires cooperation." No HOA letterhead. No envelope. Just nailed to his gate with a railroad spike. Ben stood in the moonlight, staring at it. Something primal flared in him. Not just the old firefighter grit, but the rural instinct that told him, when people threaten, what you build, you don't just defend, you prepare. He called an old buddy from his firehouse days, who now worked as a private investigator. "Can you help me track property lines, legal boundaries, surveillance timelines? I think they're about to make a very stupid mistake." Meanwhile, packages stopped arriving. One neighbor quietly apologized, said the HOA redirected the cluster box for security reasons. When Ben offered to build a new box on his land, she winced. They said that'd be considered defacement. Every move was designed to frustrate, to push him off balance. But they didn't know Ben. He grew up baling hay and outrunning bonfires, fought blazes that melted steel, and watched entire houses vanish in smoke. Bureaucrats in pastel polos didn't scare him. By week's end, he had cameras on every angle, recorded every vehicle, every footstep, every visit. He organized all HOA notices into a color-coded binder and left it out like bait, just to see who'd try to take it. And one night, he caught something else on camera. Not a person, not a trespasser, a meeting at the far side of the HOA clubhouse, just inside the window. 7 people seated around a glowing laptop. He couldn't hear them, but he could see the screen. It showed his land, zoomed in, annotated, with red lines and something labeled Annexation Zone. Ben leaned back in his chair, the air around him colder than it should have been. They weren't trying to find him. They were trying to erase him. Ben didn't sleep much after seeing that screen. Red lines, Annexation Zone, and a cluster of legalese labels near his fence, where there should have been blank earth. He spent the morning calling the county records office, again. His first 2 calls were rerouted. On the 3rd try, someone finally answered. An older woman named Doris, who'd worked in zoning for 32 years. Her voice crackled through the line like radio static. "You said you're on Ash Bluff?" she asked, tapping keys in the background. "Let me guess. Rosewood Hills messing with you?" Ben nearly laughed. "That obvious?" "Oh, honey," Doris said. "You're the 3rd landowner this month." 10 minutes later, Ben was on his way to the zoning archives. The office was in a squat cinder block building behind the main courthouse, the kind of place the public forgot existed. He expected modern databases, maybe even a few PDFs on a thumb drive. Instead, Doris led him down a narrow hallway stacked with maps, blueprints, and manila folders yellowing from age. They tried redrawing the zoning perimeter back in March, she explained, pulling out a dusty roll. Filed it as a buffer adjustment for visual compliance. Sneaky language. But it was denied. Ben frowned. Denied. But they're still using it. Doris nodded. Because people let 'em. Most folks don't check the archives. They just assume that HOA can do what it wants. She unrolled an old plat map across a drafting table. The lines were clean, the labels precise, and there, bold, black, and unchanged, was the border. Your land's clear, she said. Completely outside their jurisdiction. Ben snapped a photo, but Doris handed him something better. A certified copy with a raised seal and a notarized timestamp. Bring this if they keep pushing. He drove straight to his lawyer. Rachel Sims was a no-nonsense type with a silver bob and a caffeine addiction. She scanned the documents with an increasingly sharp grin. This is gold, she said. They're overreaching, and you've got proof. Want to hit them with a cease and desist? Ben nodded. And something else. I want to know everything about how they got access to my road. The cluster mailbox. Even the zoning proposal. Who filed it? Who approved it? If anyone. Rachel scribbled notes. They might have leveraged the access road as a utility corridor. If they built over it without securing an easement, that's illegal use. Ben's mind turned over the possibilities. So they might be using my land, while pretending they can control it. Exactly. Rachel said. They're not just wrong. They're vulnerable. He drove home feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Control. But the victory was short-lived. That evening, he found his gate wide open. Not cut this time. Unlocked. Not broken. No mess. Just open, as if someone wanted him to think he'd forgotten. As if they were telling him, we can come and go as we please. Inside the band, Daisy paced nervously. Tango wouldn't eat. Something had changed. Ben grabbed a padlock and secured the gate shut, reinforced with chain. Then he posted another sign, this one right beside the mailbox cluster at the edge of the road. Access by permission only. Trespassing. Prosecution. County Zoning Code. Payugara 57, 112 attached. And beneath that, a laminated copy of the old survey map. Certified seal gleaming in the porch light. The next day, 3 SUVs idled outside his fence for an hour, watching. They didn't. Honk. Didn't speak. Just waited. Ben sat on his porch with a mug of coffee and a camera on a tripod. He didn't wave this time, because now he wasn't just defending his land. He was preparing to reclaim it. The next week opened like the sky before a thunderstorm. Grey, still, heavy with something unspoken. Ben didn't need permission to act anymore. He had his map, his legal documents, and Rachel's go-ahead. The HOA had crossed the line. He was about to draw a new one, this time with concrete and cold law. He spent Monday turning his land into a fortress. The first addition was a privacy fence, 7 feet high, thick cedar boards, and steel posts drilled deep into the rock. Where his property bordered rosewood hills, Ben added tall hedgerows, with barbed wire discreetly strung through the top canopy. It didn't look like much from a distance, but up close, it whispered, "Don't try me." Then came the no-access zone barriers. Ben had every legal right to block the unapproved service road the HOA had quietly used to justify parcel drop-offs and construction vehicle passage. A crew he hired poured a line of decorative concrete bollards across it, each painted in cheerful, rural colours, reds, greens, barn yellow. They looked cute. They also stopped vehicles cold. He mounted cameras to each one, solar-powered with infrared. Rachel helped him word the accompanying signage, just right, private road, HOA use, prohibited under county zoning code. Trespassing will be recorded and referred to civil court. By Wednesday, the HOA fired its first real countershot, an emergency injunction filed through their private counsel, demanding Ben cease obstruction of communal access points and return Rosewood Hills visual consistency per shared charter extensions. Rachel read the filing and smirked. They're bluffing. These shared charter extensions don't apply to you. They're citing a document the county rejected. Ben wasn't a lawyer, but even he could see the desperation. Still, the tension was thickening. The standoffs grew more obvious. Twice, Ben caught residents, people he'd never seen before, pacing the edge of his fence with cameras. Once, someone in a white linen outfit actually threw seed over the barrier to try luring Daisy out again. Ben caught it all on video and sent it to Rachel, who added it to the rapidly thickening legal folder titled HOA Hostilities. But it wasn't all legal briefs and surveillance. On Thursday evening, Ben got an unexpected knock at the gate. It was Mark, the neighbor who lived 2 houses down in Rosewood. Always polite, but cautious. This time he looked different, like he'd just walked away from a decision he couldn't take back. "I'm not here to spy," Mark said, lifting his hands. "Can I come in for a second?" Ben hesitated, then opened the latch. Mark stepped in, glancing around at the reinforced property. "Place looks like Fort Knox." Ben gave a dry smile. "I call it Fort Freedom." Mark sighed. "Look, you're not the only one. The HOA's been expanding. Slowly, quietly. They tried hitting us with fees for a backyard garden last year. Then they said our solar panels were visually disruptive. I filed a dispute, and suddenly my lawn got flagged for being non-compliant." Ben raised an eyebrow. "So why are you here now?" "Because," Mark said, "I saw the plans." Ben tensed. "What plans?" Mark pulled out a folded piece of paper. "They call it Project Unity. A full aesthetic rezone that includes not just your property, but the farmland beyond it. If it goes through, you'll be looking at a subdivision with 20 identical homes by next fall." Ben stared at the document. It wasn't an HOA plan. It was a developer map, co-signed by a construction firm and approved by the Rosewood Board. "They want your land," Mark said, voice low. "Not because of the goats, but because it's the only thing standing between them. An expansion." Ben looked out across his pasture. Daisy grazed near the fence, blissfully unaware, but Ben's fists clenched around the map. They didn't just want him gone. They wanted everything. Ben stared at the developer's map, long after Mark left. It sat on his kitchen table like a ticking bomb, each lot number a countdown. He traced the borders with his finger. His pasture, his barn, the dirt lane that led down to the river, and saw how neatly his property fit into their design. Like a puzzle piece they couldn't quite pry loose. The next morning, the first real act of sabotage struck. The goats were missing. Ben found the gate open again, chain cut clean through like someone had used bolt cutters. The lock was gone. No sign of it in the grass or dirt. Daisy and Tango were nowhere in sight. Ben's heart thundered. He grabbed his truck keys and tore down the road, kicking up clouds of dust. As he scanned the fields and creek beds, he found them 30 minutes later, crammed behind a neighbor's tool shed, tangled in garden netting. Panicked but unharmed, someone had herded them there. Ben freed the goats, loaded them into the trailer, and returned home without a word. But his silence was a storm in the making. He reviewed all camera footage. The intruder came just past midnight. Hoodie, gloves, flashlight. Every move quick and confident, like they'd done it before. He couldn't make out a face. But the body language was familiar. He didn't call the police. He didn't call Rachel. He called the media. A local freelance journalist named Alea had messaged him after his zoning post went viral online. She wanted an interview. He said yes. By sunset, she stood in his driveway with a recorder, a notepad, and questions. He gave her the whole story. Property lines, the forged annexation, the goats, the fake injunction, the midnight trespass. Then, he handed her the county-stamped plat map, the zoning denials, and a still from the camera footage. "Why now?" she asked. "Why speak up instead of just staying quiet and fighting it in court?" Ben looked out at the land behind him, the barn, the animals, the horizon. "Because the HOA thinks I'm just one man. They don't understand that land isn't just dirt. It's roots, history, people. They thought I'd roll over for a fine. They never expected I'd push back with law and light." Alea published the article 2 days later. It exploded. The headline hit local feeds by noon. HO oversteps authority, targets farmer with illegitimate annexation plan. By evening, it was trending on regional blogs. Other homeowners from nearby communities started posting their own HOA horror stories in the comments. Solar panel fines, garden bans, even one man fined for putting a gnome on his porch. And then came the tipping point. Group of local veterans from Ben's old firehouse days showed up at his gate the following morning. "Thought you could use a few extra hands," one of them said, tossing a post hole digger into the dirt. "We've built fences before, within hours." They'd reinforced the entire perimeter, adding motion lights, pressure alarms, and a battery-powered speaker that announced, "This land is not under HOA authority. Leave immediately." Neighbors watched from a distance. Some nodded in support. A few scoffed. But one woman, an elderly resident named Mrs. Caldwell, came by with a jar of peach preserves and a whisper, "You're doing what most of us were. Too scared to." Ben thanked her quietly. That night, he received an anonymous letter in a plain envelope. No stamp, no signature, just 4 words scrawled on a piece of torn notebook paper. "Back down, or else." Ben folded the note carefully and slid it into his legal binder. Then he wrote a sign in red paint and mounted it above his gate. "This land is not for sale, not for annexation, not for bullies." And underneath, smaller, "Try again. I dare. You." The HOA had made their threats. Now it was time for Ben's counterattack. The county hearing room buzzed with quiet tension. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as a dozen HOA board members filed in, dressed like they were attending a garden party instead of a legal battle. Their lawyer, a smug, sharp-featured man in a navy blue suit, carried a polished leather briefcase and a plastic smile. Ben entered through the side door with Rachel Sims at his side, a stack of binders in one hand and a rolled-up zoning map in the other. He wore jeans and boots. No tie, no smile, just grit. The room wasn't large, but it was full. Neighbours, local media, a couple of off-duty deputies, and even Doris from zoning, who gave Ben a quiet nod from the back row. The hearing opened with formalities. Then came the HOA's presentation. Their lawyer stood and clicked through a series of slides. "Aesthetic inconsistency," he began. "Violation of unified community image. Livestock within residential sightlines. Unauthorized fencing. Obstruction of access roads. And deliberate provocation of board directives." Ben resisted the urge to laugh. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, "We submit that Mr. Palmer's land, lies within the proposed Rosewood Community Expansion Zone, as outlined in these preliminary annexation plans filed by our development partner. He clicked again, revealing a glossy map labeled Rosewood Phase 1, Elevation Estates. Rachel stood immediately. Objection. That plan was filed without county approval, based on zoning language that was rejected. We have certified documents from the zoning department confirming the denial. The hearing officer, a graying man with thick glasses and a neutral stare, motioned for calm. You'll have your time, Councillor Sims. Rachel sat. Ben could feel the heat rising behind his eyes. The HOA lawyer finished his smug slideshow and sat back like a man who'd already bought champagne. Then Rachel rose. She didn't speak from notes. She didn't pace. She walked directly to the projector, inserted a flash drive, and pulled up a scanned document. It was the county plat map, the one with the raised seal. This, she said, is the original certified map of Ben Palmer's property, established before Rosewood Hills ever existed. You'll notice something very important here. The boundary. She highlighted the thick black line. Everything inside that line is Ben's. Everything outside belongs to Rosewood. There are no shared easements, no overlap, no dual authority. She advanced the slide. This is the zoning department's denial of the annexation adjustment, dated and stamped. It proves Rosewood tried to claim land they had no legal right to. She clicked again, revealing photos. Daisy grazing, the bulk cut gate, the note that said, back down, or else. And this, she said, holding up the paper copy of the threatening message, is evidence that this situation is not about aesthetics, but targeted harassment, an attempted land acquisition through intimidation. Murmurs spread. Through the room, Rachel turned to the board. You tried to paint this as a man with goats upsetting your hedges, but what you've really done is try to quietly absorb his land for profit. And when he said no, you sent in threats and shadows instead of subpoenas. The hearing officer cleared his throat. And Mr. Palmer, do you have anything to add? Ben stepped forward. Just one step. I didn't move here to fight. I moved here to farm, to raise animals and watch the stars without someone measuring the angle of my front porch lights. He looked at the board, then back at the audience. I don't care how fancy your maps are. This land's been mine long before your HOA charter existed, and it'll still be mine long after your model homes crumble. The room fell silent. The officer nodded once. This hearing is adjourned. A decision will be issued within 72 hours. Ben left without looking back, but outside, under the blazing sky, he couldn't help but feel it. The storm was almost over, but the final strike was still to come. 72 hours never felt so long. Ben spent the next 3 days keeping busy, fixing the fence, repainting the barn, sitting with Daisy and Tango under the oak tree at sunset. His phone buzzed constantly, neighbors checking in, local news asking for updates, even strangers from other towns offering moral support and legal advice. But on the third day, just past noon, the decision came. A knock on the door, a courier, in a county vest, a sealed envelope. Ben opened it on the porch. Rachel arrived minutes later, having gotten her own copy. She read it once, then again. Then she smiled like a woman who just won a chess match in 3 dimensions. You did it, she said. You really did it. The ruling was clear and uncompromising. The HOA of Rosewood Hills is found to have acted beyond its authority in pursuing enforcement, construction access, and annexation of land not within its jurisdiction. All injunctions, fines, and trespass claims against Mr. Benjamin Palmer are hereby voided. Further, based on submitted evidence, Rosewood Hills is prohibited from future attempts to assert governance over any portion of Parcel 12A, Palmer property, under penalty of civil violation. Ben let out a long breath and looked toward the line of trees separating his land from the neat hedgerows of Rosewood Hills. It was over, but Ben wasn't finished. That evening, with Rachel's help and the guidance of a very enthusiastic civil attorney who'd reached out pro bono, Ben filed an easement revocation with the county, effectively cancelling any right-of-way the HOA had been using to cross his land. It turned out that the access lane they'd used for years had never been formally recorded. It only existed by handshake agreement from the previous owner. Now, it was done. Ben installed a solar-powered gate across the gravel path, complete with a keypad and an automatic lock. Only 3 numbers worked: his, Rachel's, and the fire department, and the final nail, a sign, a big one, custom-made and hung with wrought iron brackets. Notice: the HOA of Rosewood Hills is barred from this property by county order. No representative, board member, or affiliate may enter or engage without direct written consent. This land is sovereign. This land is free. Below it, in smaller print, the goats stay. That sign went viral within a day. News outlets picked up the story. A hashtag started trending. Goatgate. Supporters began mailing Ben custom Freedom Farm stickers and handmade wooden goat ornaments. Someone even sent Daisy a crocheted scarf. But the best part came a week later. A knock on the door again, this time from a woman in her 60s, with sun-stained skin and worn boots. She introduced herself as Helen Barron. She owned 40 acres of land north of Ben's place, and she had her own HOA troubles. "I read your story," she said. "They're trying the same thing on me, but I never thought fighting back was even possible, until I saw what you did." Ben stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. "Then let's talk." They sat until sundown, swapping maps, loopholes, and war stories. By the end, Helen wasn't alone anymore. Neither was Ben. Within 2 months, 5 other landowners joined what the media began calling the Freedom Border. Each put up their own version of Ben's sign. Some had goats. Others had gardens, windmills, or backyard archery ranges. Rosewood Hills went quiet. The developer pulled out, and Ben, he kept farming. Not because he had to, but because he could. In the end, it wasn't about goats. It wasn't even about zoning. It was about drawing a line and daring anyone to cross it. And when they did, he made sure they couldn't cross it again.